This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. My new book about addictions, All the Way Home, Building Recovery That Works. The biggest business in the world is armaments. Right up there next to it are oil, illegal drugs, and pharmacology, legal drugs. Some serious questions have to be asked about pharmacology. One is, does pharmacology own American psychiatry? Here's another question. Is it true that there are millions and millions of more people allegedly mentally ill in America than there are in third world countries? Is the reason because we're doping them up with all kinds of psychotropic drugs? For the answer to those and other very, very ugly questions, one turns to this astonishing new book, Anatomy of an Epidemic by Robert Whitaker, also author of Mad in America. Here's a telling line, but there are thousands of them in this book. American psychiatry has told the public a false story over the past 30 years. The field promoted the idea that its drugs fix chemical imbalances in the brain when they do no such thing. And it grossly exaggerated the merits of the second generation psychotropics. This book has kind of seized a great deal of the working life of a friend of ours, Reverend Stephen Epperson, who is the minister at the Unitarian Church and has been up there at 49th and Oak for a great many years. We're delighted to have you here, Stephen.
Thank you, David.
Tell us why this has become such a passionate issue for you.
Well, it started out as like a personal story. A member of our family was introduced into the mental health landscape, which turned out, instead of being some place where we found healing, it became a nightmare. And the nightmare we began to see over time was one that was really compounded by the medications that he was being prescribed by psychiatrists and doctors here in Vancouver. We were really, keeping track of what was going on. We were primary caregivers, and we were keeping very close notes, taking note of side effects. And then we presented these to, attending physicians and his, mental health team, and they basically said, this can't be, and butt out. You're being intrusive parents.
Isn't that lovely? You're being intrusive parents. In other words, parents who would like to be informed and who love their child. That's called intrusive.
Yeah, something like that. Interfering also was the word. And then what happened is that my spouse attended a conference, a psychiatric conference in Portland, Oregon, where Robert Whitaker was speaking.
Yes.
And for the first time in a number of years, we heard someone who had actually gone through the medical data, had analyzed it, and had come up with an astonishing story that really fit our own experience. And so we invited Robert Whitaker to come and speak in Vancouver. He spoke at the Unitarian Church, Vancouver Public Library, to packed audiences.
Yes.
And then I started talking about this to my congregation and found out, not to my surprise, that many, many, many families are suffering through extraordinary emotional and mental distress, and that they too are not really being served well by the psychiatric industry.
Let's look at a pattern that seems to emerge over and over and over again. I'm sure this is what you've experienced. Friends of mine have experienced it. And Whitaker chronicles this over and over again. A person shows signs of whatever, behaving oddly, we'll say. Could be schizophrenia, could be bipolar, could be depression, anxiety, whatever, okay? Suddenly, we, as a health-conscious society, start giving them, say, a drug. And it has reasonable short-term positive effects. Then those effects sort of lessen. So meanwhile, the brain is trying to compensate, so it creates all kinds of compensatory action. Then the person tries to stop. They start going crazy because the brain is doing other things. So then the doctor says, well, you need 2 other drugs to work on that. Before you know it, patient A is on a cocktail of poisons, of medications, because medications are poisons, just usually in small amounts that help us. That's what an antibiotic is, right? And now the person is on for life, right?
Well, that's often, and unfortunately, the message that is given time and again to people who find themselves in emotional or mental distress, anxiety, or grieving over the loss of a job or a loved one, and what they're being told by pediatricians, by GPs, by psychiatrists, who've been informed by and educated by the pharmaceutical, industry and their representatives, that what this person is experiencing isn't an existential crisis, crisis of meaning, or they're going through some really, really difficult time, but they have an underlying biological disease, a broken brain, some people will call it.
Yes.
And then what they say is that this disease is like diabetes, and how a diabetic has to be on insulin for life. You are going to have to be on medications for life to deal with an underlying disease.
Reverend Stephen Epperson, we are on some weird wavelength together. I was about to tell you that a week ago, walking to this building, I ran into an old friend. And I said, how are the girls, his daughters? Well, the youngest one, the older one, problems, schizophrenia, and so on. And I said, don't tell me. We'll say his name is Dale. It's not. I said, don't tell me. The psychiatrist told you that she'll be on these medications for life, and it's just like being on diabetes, you have to take insulin. And he said, how do you know that? That's exactly what they said. I said, because that's their sales pitch.
Yeah, it is their sales pitch. It really is. And the sad irony is that if you actually go into the literature and you read statements by the likes of Dr. Kenneth Kendler, who's a professor of psychiatry and genetics, really, really prominent person in his field at the Virginia Commonwealth University. He says, this is in 2005, we have hunted for big, simple neurochemical explanations for psychiatric disorders and have not found them.
And have not found
and have not found. And then the editor-in-chief of Psychiatric Times, a guy named Ronald Pies, said, in truth, the chemical imbalance notion was always a kind of urban legend, never a theory seriously propounded by well-informed psychiatrists.
And the World Health Organization, WHO, and others, as Whitaker shows again and again and again throughout this amazing, compelling book, have stated clearly that nobody has been able to prove that there's a chemical imbalance issue, and that these drugs are either doing nothing or creating more harm. And isn't the first part of the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm?
Yes, or certainly, certainly not. What the idea of the Hippocratic Oath is to improve on what nature itself can do in terms of healing for the individual. And what happened is that Whitaker, who was researching schizophrenia, in the States, the history of schizophrenia, found out that up until the introduction of, Haldol, Thorazine, and then second-generation antipsychotics, is that people really had, a good chance of remitting.
Naturally.
The disorder was self-limiting. People were going to get well. Bipolar, basically, before the 60s and 70s, it didn't even exist, certainly not among young people. And then he thought, okay, now wait a minute, you've got, you have a disorder that is self-limiting. A lot of people are getting better. You have the introduction of these pharmaceuticals, these drugs, that, beginning in the 60s, 70s, and then with Prozac in the 80s, he says you should be seeing outcomes where you've got lots and lots of people getting well. And so, where am I going to find out, that kind of data?
Because people wrote books saying the Prozac not only makes people better, it makes them superior.
Yeah, it makes them better than well.
Better than well.
Better than well. And so he went to disability statistics in the United States and found out, much to his astonishment, that instead of people getting better, people were getting sick and chronically sick. And in disability, like in the disability in the States, people who were on disability for mental illnesses in 1987, there were about 1 million people. That's increased fourfold over, from 1987 to 2007. The same thing happened with bipolar. It was a relatively rare disease a half a century ago. Since then, it's increased 100-fold.
To make it worse, it's become part of the lingua franca of the street. It's become part of, it's like saying Twitter to say bipolar. It's like everybody's bipolar. Huh? No. And the true effrontery of all this is you cannot watch a golf game on TV without some mysterious drug being advertised. And when they list the possible side effects, it's like reading Whitaker's book. You may be suicidal, you may be irritable, your leg may fall off, your nose may explode. I mean, they list about 90 possible dreadful side effects. Your liver will drop out.
Yep. You become sexually impotent.
Yes.
You become obese, diabetic. You'll have liver and heart failure. You have cognitive decline.
Lots of cognitive
and
decline.
Those kinds of things were definitely not the message we heard. And that's not the message that's getting across. That is the long-term adverse side effects of people being put on these medications.
And no matter what a psychiatrist's particular philosophy or practice may be, almost every psychiatrist will tell you that schizophrenics, for example, regularly try to get off or stop using their drugs because they feel zombified.
That's right. You hear that over and over again. People say, I feel like a zombie. I felt like a zombie on these meds.
Yeah.
But the danger is that if people go off too quickly, it's like a person who is, addicted to alcohol or addicted to heroin, and he has to go cold turkey. You're going to have a flip out. You're going to have somebody who's going to flip out. I mean, it's going to be very, very difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, the effect of these drugs basically is to, put a brake and an accelerator on full tilt, and then you take the drug off, and this accelerator goes to the metal, and there's nothing to break it. And so people get really, really upset.
And by the way, I should tell everybody that Steve gave me this book. I gave him my book, and he gave me this.
Yes,
and it was
a book for a book.
A book for a book, and it was a great exchange, as far as I'm concerned. I have a particular interest in this book, and it resonates for me because I've been saying publicly for years that in the addiction business, the harm reduction people are looking for a silver bullet. He talks about the magic bullet philosophy. Psychiatry was the material for stand-up comics. It was about Woody Allen lying on a couch, and psychiatrists were second-rate. So they started looking for their version of an antibiotic.
That's right. I mean, there is a history here, and that is indeed the perception both outside of the industry and within psychiatry itself. I mean, they were having their own existential crisis, and then along comes, these highly touted drugs, and psychiatrists who could prescribe, they are MDs, thought, aha, this is going to enable us to have legitimacy within the larger medical community and beyond.
And what's interesting is each one of those drugs was poo-pooed and dismissed within a matter of a few years and replaced by the next magic bullet.
Well, that's right. That's also part of the pharmaceutical industry's marketing campaign.
Remember Milltown?
Oh yeah, indeed.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to take a little break and take some medications and calm down, and we'll be back in a moment. It gives you an opportunity to check out our website at davidberner.com, and an opportunity for our friends to say hello. These are the folks who kindly support our work here on Shaw Community Television Cable 4. Back in a moment. This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. My new book about addictions, All the Way Home. That works. Reverend Stephen Epperson from Vancouver's Unitarian Church at 49th and Oak is our guest. And he is our guest because of this particular book that he recommended to me, Anatomy of an Epidemic by Robert Whitaker, in which Mr. Whitaker chronicles with great diligence, study after study after study, that shows that psychotropic drugs are highly questionable in their efficacy, and that the whole PR job, the whole snow job that American psychiatry has done on the public is exactly that. It's a real emperor's new clothes situation, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And I mean, the summary of the studies that he took a look at, the long-term outcomes literature, you know, he came up with certain kinds of conclusions after looking at all the data that so many people had been ignoring, or it was kind of disparate as lying around, but he brought the data together, you know, did a really good job of investigating, came up with the following summary, that research shows that antipsychotics worsen the long-term course of schizophrenia.
Yes.
Depression has been transformed from an episodic disorder into a chronic illness with much higher disability rates, that the use of illicit drugs, stimulants, and antidepressants have helped create a 100-fold increase in the prevalence of bipolar, and that functional outcomes for bipolar illnesses has dramatically deteriorated in the modern world. I mean, it's a disaster.
And what do you say to the people who say, "Oh, Stephen, you're getting hysterical. This isn't so. My cousin, you know, Jennifer, she has X disease and she takes drugs and she's fine." What do you say to those people?
Well, if they say that she's fine, I just echo what a psychiatric survivor, John McCarthy in Ireland, said: the blessings of God on you, okay? But don't tell me, okay, that I shouldn't be trying to get off, you know, these medications, or that I shouldn't be working with other people to move beyond, you know, beyond labels and beyond, you know, working within a drug, you know, based paradigm of care.
Yes.
Towards recovery, because the message that I think needs to come through loud and clear over and over again to people who are in distress and who are being faced with a choice about medications or who are on medications, that recovery is possible, okay? I mean, there are huge recovery, you know, psychiatric recovery movements both in North America and Europe.
Right.
And one group in particular that, you know, really has stood out, they're a mental health group in Finland. Instead of responding, I mean, back in the day, back in the, you know, 70s and 80s, they were responding to people in distress in a conventional way with, you know, psychotropic medication as a first response. But they were seeing, you know, that the outcomes were uniformly poor. And so they said, we've got to rethink our paradigm of care. And what they did instead is, you know, work out a treatment program that's called now Open Dialogue.
Yes.
Where when and if someone in the community calls in, okay, that someone's having a psychotic breakdown, within 24 hours, a team comes to that home, calls on that individual and the family to bring in as many people from that person's social network of support together in a team meeting, and then openly, you know, they talk through, you know, the issues this person's, you know, facing, and then together try to come up with a treatment plan. But they don't talk about drugs, they don't talk about meds. They look at the individuals who are in that person's social network as resources for recovery and for health.
That's a very different approach.
And they have, I mean, they've kept very, very close, you know, documentation of their work for the past 30 years, and they have the best recovery rates in the Western world, in the industrialized world.
Let's talk about the element that I find truly monstrous in this story. It's bad enough to take people and send them in the wrong direction and make them worse than they are. But now we are really going whole hog in giving medications not only to children, but unbelievably to infants in cribs.
That's right.
People are now diagnosing kids in diapers as mentally ill. How one is able to do that baffles me. I completely don't get it. And here's an article in the Vancouver Sun of about 3 weeks ago. BC study, increase in antipsychotic drug prescriptions for kids, great concern. Yeah, many of us have had this great concern for a long time now. Ritalin, to me, I believe that Ritalin is one of the great hoaxes of the modern world.
Well, it's not only a hoax,
Yes.
but it's a danger, because, I mean, let's go back like to the early 90s, and I had a son who was, you know, he was healthy, he was rambunctious, and in school he was rambunctious and, you know, very physical in school. We got a note from the teacher one day saying, you know, your son has got attention deficit disorder.
And how does the teacher qualify? See,
exactly.
This is before you go on, I want to hear the rest of this. But now I was going to make that point. We've got teachers doing diagnoses.
Yes, and school counselors and principals, etc.
And they come up with his psychiatric diagnosis. Right. This kid has ADHD. How do they know that?
And we were young parents, not knowing any better. We went with our son to his pediatrician.
Yes.
Thankfully, this wise pediatrician said, there's absolutely nothing wrong with your son. Okay? He just needs to be on a horse and chopping wood, you know? So he sent a note back to the school saying this kid needs recess and let him walk around the classroom when he's feeling, you know, when he's got the energy.
For a guy from the Unitarian Church, is it possible you speak Yiddish? My grandfather would have said, he's got spilkus.
Yeah,
spilkus means he's, you know, he likes jumping up and down. You know, he's an excitable kid.
He definitely had spilkus. You know, he was a tigger. And but what's happening is that many, many pediatricians, again, who are being educated by pharmaceutical industry reps, are being told that, you know, the energy, this spilkus of the kids isn't nature. They have an underlying mental, brain disorder that has to be, that has to be addressed.
It's a chemical imbalance
that has to be addressed with stimulants.
Yes.
Well, what's happening is, and this is something, another issue that Whitaker was studying and analyzing, is that within a year or two, young kids who are being put on these stimulants are beginning to show greater aggressivity. Okay, they're also showing cognitive decline. And really, really poor social skills.
Antisocial behavior.
That's right.
Violence, tendency to suicide, all kinds of risks.
So at first, like within a couple of weeks, a parent and teachers may see greater clarity and a person being focused on their work, but that begins to wear off very quickly into something much, much more dangerous.
And let's be honest, the first thing that people see when you give a child Ritalin is that their lives are more peaceful for a week or so. Well, the teacher's life and the parent's life suddenly is a little less demanding because Jake or Johnny is, a little cooled out.
Well, I think that the pharmacological revolution of the 70s and 80s was, for many people, a godsend. That is, people said, oh, I've got this distress, and they were being told they had an underlying disease. Okay, well, I've got a disease, now maybe I can work on it. But it was also a message to teachers. Okay, it was a message to people in, churches, synagogues, colleagues, etc. Okay, that it's not our responsibility. Okay, this person's sick. So they're going to be prescribed a medication that will make them well. It wasn't my responsibility, right? So people all of a sudden have this burden of guilt and of responsibility taken from their shoulders, and that's one of the reasons why it was widely, embraced by lots of organizations.
Has Whitaker been sued? Have you been sued? Are we going to be sued?
Whitaker hasn't been sued. He's definitely been criticized.
Yes, I'm sure.
Okay, roundly criticized by organizations that are deeply, deeply invested in the drug-based paradigm of care. I haven't been sued. I've been criticized, and I'm sure you've been criticized as well. It just goes with the territory.
I get criticized as soon as I get up in the morning. But on this issue, are we going to be sued on this issue? We might. Who knows?
No, because I think that, in particularly no, because the pendulum is beginning to swing away from this paradigm of care, because you're getting, some of the leaders in, the psychiatric world beginning to say, that there is no evidence, okay, that this drug-based paradigm is, producing the kind of healthy outcomes that we've been searching for 30 years. It's just not happening.
You're not a doctor, you're not a psychiatrist. What would you tell someone to do with an 18-year-old girl who suddenly shows all the signs of what we call schizophrenia?
Well, the first thing is to recognize that this person really is in distress.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, the suffering, David. the suffering is real.
I know that.
I don't want to, pass that off.
You're not trying to diminish the suffering. It's real. Okay.
All of us go through times of great suffering, and of grief. Okay. The question is, how are we going to respond to it? Are we going to respond to it as an event in a person's life where he or she can call on, a community of support, of people, of resources around her to be with her and to walk with her through this, or do we turn outside to the pharmaceutical industry and to psychiatry, for a magic bullet, for a pill that is supposed to take that person's grief away.
And as you know, in working through that, marriages often collapse.
It's a big strain.
Was there terrible stress on you and your wife?
There's a strain.
Yes.
I mean, there's, you know, and I speak with other people,
Yes.
you know, lots of families where
Yeah.
that is definitely a strain, you know, on family life. It happens.
Yeah. Now you're continuing this sort of what can we call it? Your mission. This is part of your mission.
Well,
Why is it?
It's education.
It came to you as a personal issue, but also you've been the reverend up at the Unitarian Church for years.
It's a pastoral issue. Yeah. It's an education issue.
Why is it a pastoral issue?
Well, because there are people in my congregation and beyond who are suffering as a result.
Yeah.
And that's part of my work.
And you're continuing this series with other guests and other people.
That's right.
Yeah, your congregation, your congregation responds to all this. They love it. They like it.
It's a difficult, David. It's a difficult message to get across. I mean, it really is. It's a difficult message because conventionally we want to trust and believe in the medical community to respond in ways that will promote our health.
Yes.
Okay. And we've been sold a particular story, and a myth that we've come to believe. But part of what being an adult is, okay, is parting the curtain and looking beyond the myth at the truth, and that is, you know, part of what we have to do.
You meanie, exposing the wizard behind the curtain. Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for being here. It's such an important issue. Lovely.
All right.
Okay, thanks, folks. That's it. We're out of time. Next week, Vivian Krause is a journalist who's been writing some very, very strong questions about how is the mayor really financed and what is he really up to? We'll find out. DavidBerner.com is the site to go to. Thank you for being here this evening on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Good night.